So welcome to another episode for Just Business Talk, Sell Any Biz podcast. My today's guest is Jed Morris, and he's a partner at Sunset Cost Partners. From his military background in merger and acquisitions, today we're going to talk about his transition, um, how he transitioned from the military to all the way to merger acquisition and business sales. All right, thank you, Morris. Thanks for joining my podcast today.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background. So you started military, and then you end up being in Microsoft, and and then now you do deals. So just let's start with your military experience. So and what brings you in merger acquisitions.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a lot of people, I went to college not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And I found myself 2.5 years into college with no money and bad grades. And I came to a point where I realized it was either, I was going to be a bartender for the rest of my life or I need
Hmm.
to figure something out. And for me, that was the Air Force, kind of a spur of the moment thing. So I enlisted, joined the Air Force. I let them pick the job for me, which happened to be finance, and I knew nothing about that. And then that turned into a 10-year career where I spent a lot of time in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I spent 3.5 years in Germany with Special Operations Command Europe, with U.S. forces in NATO. Started off managing small budgets, like baseline budgets, for individual
Hmm.
military bases. And then by the time I was done, I was managing, multi-billion-dollar operations across different continents. And then ultimately back in DC, working to build and develop the next great fighter jet that no one talks about. So uh,
Right.
pretty, pretty fun career, an interesting time, and did 10 years and absolutely loved it.
Great, great. So you made an impressive transition from military to Microsoft, even teaching yourself to code. So what was the transition like, and what skills carried over?
Yeah, I think the biggest skill is just the ability to adapt. And so, one thing that people don't realize about veterans in particular is that you're going to switch bases and you're going to switch command structures every 3 to 4 years, right? And so you're constantly moving. And even if your job doesn't change, so like you might be a fighter pilot, or you might be a logistics soldier, or you might be like, it doesn't really matter what your job is. When you change, you might be doing the same job at a different base, but that job is very different because it's going to be different based on the location, the mission, the command, the team you're working with. So you're constantly having to relearn a job. And many times it's a job that you haven't done in the past. And so one of the core competencies of veterans that makes them really successful when they transition out of the military is the fact that they can pick up and learn something very quickly. And
Mm.
I didn't know where I was going to go when I got out of the military. I had no real plan. I just knew that I was ready for something different. And so, like many veterans who, maybe they don't know what they want to do, but they understand the importance of setting themselves up for success. For me,
Yeah.
I joined an MBA program at NYU.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
during that process, that allowed me to test out a lot of different options. I learned very quickly that finance or consulting was not for me.
Mhm.
Wasn't interested in doing like 60, 80-hour weeks in New York City. And I wasn't interested in being on the road 60, 70 hours a week as a consultant. So looking into industry, looking into tech was more interesting. I didn't know anything about tech. I didn't know how to code. In fact, just before I joined my MBA program, my last assignment in the Air Force, I was working in a finance organization where we had a bunch of different Excel spreadsheets. And the biggest issue we had was updating these on a weekly basis. And it
Mhm.
was even more complicated because they're all across different levels of secure systems. So I have my normal internet, computer. I'd have my secret computer, my top secret computer, and all these systems that can't talk to each other. And I'm sitting
Yeah.
here manually updating all of these spreadsheets. And I started Googling, like, how can I automate this? Learned that there was something called Python, started diving into what code means and how that works. So I say that just to say that I knew nothing.
Mm.
And during the course of my MBA program, I got a contact with Microsoft, and I got an opportunity to join them as a software developer working on their Azure cloud. And the only reason I got that job was because I had a top secret clearance with the government. And so
Right.
Microsoft figured that, they're building out the new ultra secure cloud for the US government. And it was a lot easier to find people who already had the clearance that they could then, teach them how to code, as opposed to going through the arduous journey of trying to get, regular civilians that high level of classification. And so
Right.
I, I did a couple of software engineering boot camps, but let's not kid ourselves. I learned how to do it on YouTube University. I was sitting there coding for oh man, 8 or 9 months straight, just trying to figure this out. And then spent almost 2 years at Microsoft, and it was a drinking from a fire hose, but self-taught CS degree, if you mind.
Yeah, very impressive. So, what got you in ETA industry, merger acquisitions?
Well, like everything else, it was just by accident, really. Um,
Hmm.
I was wrapping up my MBA at NYU, and it was the spring of 2021. And one of my very last classes was entrepreneurial finance. And it wasn't about how to go buy a business. It was like, how do you deal with finances in small businesses? Think $10 million of revenue and under.
Like
And it
budgeting
really,
and stuff, right? Budgeting,
yeah,
forecasting, and this sort of
yeah,
stuff.
budgeting, forecasting, how to do a 13-month cash flow analysis. And
Yeah.
then there was a chapter on transactions. And it was
Okay.
about like, in the private market, like how do small businesses, how do they actually transact? If I was going to sell one, if I was going to buy one, based on certain multiples of EBITDA. First time I'd ever heard the word multiple, and just started, and I got hooked. I read this whole textbook within, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours on a flight
That's
from DC to San
right
Diego.
after that's right after your stint on Microsoft, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so
Okay.
I'm binging this book,
Hmm.
and I couldn't believe what I was reading. And then I started getting on Google. I was like, what is entrepreneurship through acquisition, which is ETA, how they described it, and it's nothing more than buying and selling small businesses. And that's how I discovered that this had been a thing, but only in a small subsect of the economy. Stanford University had been doing this to their graduate school since the '80s through search funds. And then Harvard Business School got really big on it in the '90s, based on their entrepreneurship through acquisition self-funded model. And it had
Hmm.
slowly kind of gone out to like more of the elite business schools, and it hadn't really trickled down beyond that yet. I attended Harvard Business School's ETA conference in 2021 and just started kind of learning about it. And
Hmm.
since then, as we all know, like, it has exploded. Like every business school has an ETA course at this point. You got people like Cody Sanchez talking about it from the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
Walker Dybel, who wrote the infamous Buy Then Build book, he runs his acquisition lab, and it's always been there, but now it's mainstream and people are talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So how many acquisitions have you completed so far?
At this point, two completed acquisitions.
So
So,
two
like many
completed.
searchers, you start off and I did a 2 year search, and I've talked to hundreds of business owners. I put out about 20 LOIs, five serious discussions that turned into two closed deals. So it is absolutely a slog. You have to get through a lot of businesses to find a decent one.
Okay, so you went through a 2 year self-funded search to acquire a business. So what was some of the most challenging and rewarding part of that journey, finding that acquisition?
Yeah, I think the most challenging part is one that I hear from a lot of searchers that I talk to now, which is, there's no one way to do it. Like, how do you search? And it's a process of learning, like, what works and what doesn't work, and that can be different for different people. But there are a few things that are kind of line up, and we know that, like, searching online forums is not the best way to go. And so
Yeah.
it really just comes down to, there's two avenues. There's broker outreach, where I build a big network of brokers where I convince them that I'm a serious buyer, and to the point to where they know what my buy box is, and the hope is that I follow up with them, and then they contact me when they come across something that fits my buy box. And that only works if you build a relationship with the brokers, if they take you seriously as a buyer, because they're getting reached out every single day from hundreds of people just kicking tires. And so
Yeah.
anything you can do to demonstrate your competence and your um, professionalism, that you're serious and that you have the financial capital and the ability to close. If you don't have the ability to close, they're not going to waste their time on you. So building
Yeah.
out that network is really important. The other
Mhm.
half of that is proprietary search. So this is looking for businesses that are not, being actively trying to be sold on the market, whether through a broker or through a marketplace. And that proprietary searching it's just like lead generation in a startup. It is you trying to figure out any way possible to get in front of a business owner. That could be going through business records. It could be Google search. It could be walking around, knocking on doors, joining the chamber of commerce in your local city, like anything you can imagine that is going to get your name and your face and anything in front of somebody who might be interested in selling their business.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So many people, they don't talk about the bankruptcy and all the difficult part of this journey. So you faced bankruptcy and had closed a business and experienced many fears. So, what did that experience teach you about resilience and moving forward?
It taught me a couple things. First and foremost, before I started searching, I kind of had this like, come to Jesus moment where, I really did sit down and think, all right, well, if this is successful, then I could be one of those people that you see on like Will Smith's Acquiring Minds podcast, or, who's,
Yeah,
has a wonderful story to tell you about how it all worked out really great. That could
yeah,
happen. And, the success rate in ETA is really good. It's over 90%, especially for
mm,
SBA backed loans, because
yeah,
there is a lot of due diligence that goes into it. And that's why it's a great opportunity. But the
mm,
failure rate still exists. And I thought about it, and before I started searching, I resolved in myself that, if it was to fail, I knew two things. I knew one, that I live in America where there is no debtor's prison. And so the worst case scenario is I declare bankruptcy, lose everything, and I have to start over from scratch. But I don't lose what I know, right? I didn't lose what the experience that I had gained. And I still had a few outsized advantages, one being an MBA from a great school, two being like a top secret clearance where, if everything goes terrible, then hopefully I can just get a job with a defense contractor doing something.
yeah,
But I had a few things there where I'm like, all right, well, in the worst case scenario, it couldn't be that bad. And that has proven to be true. Like, let's be clear, it sucks. It really sucks. I don't wish bankruptcy, personal or business, on anybody. But I do want to make sure that I make it clear to people that I've spoken to and people that are listening that if you're in that position, it is not the end of the world. You'll be fine. And the experience that you've gained through this whole, ordeal will be worth it in spades.
right,
It's amazing how much you learn in failure as opposed to your successes. If you've never had to stare down a cash crunch and missing payroll multiple times, wondering how you're actually going to keep this thing afloat, and like having to be so resourceful to keep things moving, week after week, month after month, you'll be more than prepared to step into a business where things are going well. So
yeah, certainly,
you learn a lot. So that's probably
certainly,
been the most rewarding thing. Is I think after my business failed, I kind of, you know, I stepped back into a cave for 3 months,
yeah,
kind of like trying to figure out like,
yeah,
man, what happened? And after about 3 months, I kind of emerged and I was like, oh, I did learn a lot. Oh,
yeah,
I actually do know what I'm doing here. I had a
yeah,
sober analysis of like what I did wrong, which was plenty. I did plenty wrong. And what I
yeah,
didn't do wrong, which was just, bad luck and market forces and whatever else, and being sober about what those really are. And
yeah.
then realizing that, oh, okay, so if I had done things this way, then maybe it would turn out a little bit differently. And yeah, and I realized, wow, I'm 100% better at this than I thought. Maybe I'm not, maybe the failure doesn't mean that I'm a failure. Maybe it just means that this deal didn't work. And maybe it's time to push forward.
I certainly I couldn't agree more. Every time you fail, you come back even stronger. But I think the key is in when you fail, learning from your failure is the key to success again. It's not that failing again and again. If you keep doing the same mistake, so the end result is going to be that you're going to fail again. So I think the key in failing and being successful is you do your self analysis better the next time. So some people, they make the same mistakes again and again, and they keep on failing up till they give up, and then they. But the successful people, they fail, they do the analysis, they correct their mistakes, and then they do it again, and they're successful.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Tahir. And
Yeah,
the real crux of what you said is that you have to have an honest conversation with yourself about what actually went wrong and your role in it. And I
yeah.
think that's the hardest thing because you have to take full ownership of the outcome. Like
And that,
everything
that
that
would
happened was your
involve
fault.
taking ownership and blaming yourself of that failure. And,
Yeah.
and many people, they blame other people and the circumstances. Oh, I failed because the market wasn't right. I failed because the seller wasn't cooperative or whatever. Yeah.
And all of that might be true, but ultimately
Yeah.
it's your fault. You're the
Yeah.
one. That's why I came back to it. I was like, look, there were things that are outside my control, but I picked my market. I picked to do the deal. I picked my business partners. I picked all of these things. Those are ultimately my decisions. And so
Mm.
the failure is mine, but also the learning experience is mine as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned that the rapid growth of entrepreneurship through acquisition, the trend is growing. So what driving this trend, and what do you think makes it so attractive for people today to get into ETA?
I think there's a number of things that are driving the trend, and I mean, you'll see across social media the normal obvious answers that are true but repeated. Like, you have a whole generation of baby boomers who are looking to retire and don't have succession plans. That's true. Or the vast majority of small businesses will never sell. That's true. That has always been true.
Yeah.
I think the big difference now, other than like maybe the abundance of additional sellers or potential sellers, is that for the first time in a very long time, the idea of acquiring a business for buyers is accepted and it's new. This has been happening for a long time. The kicker now is that you have a bunch of people who are earlier generation, maybe between the ages of like 21 and 40, who are thinking, maybe I don't want to work in an office for 45 years and hope for a 401k or a pension. Maybe I'm willing to take a perceived risk and operate a business on my own terms. And so maybe I don't need to have the brand name of working at Microsoft or Goldman Sachs when I can work for Bob's Lawn Mowing, and no one knows who that company is. But I don't care. I don't care about the reputation. I care about the personal freedom I have to set my own schedule. I care about the economic opportunity I have to build something for myself and for my family. And I care about being able to have a little bit of that kind of owner operator freedom. And so I think that's really appealing to people. And I think things like the pandemic really added fuel to the fire, so to speak.
Certainly, yeah. So you're passionate about helping veterans get into the business acquisitions also. So what specific advice or encouragement do you give to the veterans who want to pursue this journey?
Yeah, there's a couple pieces of advice that I always give veterans. But before I give you that, I'll just tell you, I think the reason I'm passionate isn't just because I'm a veteran. It's because I've met with lots of people across MBA circles, across different business organization groups who are interested in buying businesses. And what I've seen time and time again is that veterans outperform in this space. And I think it comes down to the fact that, like I said before, they're highly adaptable. I can take a veteran who's never been a plumber and stick them in a plumbing business, and they're passionate. They're going to learn that quickly. But not just that, they've got experience leading people. And so they know that, the maximum value of their time isn't being the guy or gal with their hands in the trenches, figuring it out and doing it themselves. They're not above that. They can absolutely do it. And they will do it because they need to know how it works, but they also know the power of empowering a team and the ability to lead and manage a team as opposed to just being a one man or one woman show. So that's a big part of it. The second part of that is that veterans typically come from all over the country, and as a result, a lot of them want to live in their local communities. They want to go home. They want to go to their home of record, as we say. And so they're not interested in taking a big time job in San Diego or LA or New York or Chicago. They want to go home. And a lot of times these are smaller towns. And before the pandemic, these are places that were kind of, dying or not growing economically because there weren't those kinds of jobs available. And now veterans are thinking, well, why don't I just, buy an HVAC company in the town I want to live in? That way I can grow it. I control my own destiny. I have this independent commander kind of, ethos about me, and they're pillars of their community. Because the moment you're an owner operator in your community, you're a leader in that town. And so that's an outcome that's, very appealing to veterans, and one that I think will, really help not only veterans be able to continue on in a new mission, after they've left their military service, but also contribute back to their communities in a way that, quite frankly, a lot of citizens can.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I think veterans are more disciplined simply because of their training and the process they go through. So they're more disciplined when they know the process or they learn the process. They are more likely to stick with the process. And the acquisitions is all about following the same process again and again.
Yeah, and that's not to say that there's not unique challenges. One of the biggest challenges veterans face when they do this is the transition, because instead of being in a highly regulated, highly regimented organization where everything's clear and spelled out for you, now you have to figure it out yourself. And so the hardest struggle that a lot of veterans have is recreating a structure for themselves that fits their goals and their lifestyle from nothing, because the structure is no longer given to them. They have to build it for themselves. And then that's a difficult transition. Most of that is mental. But getting to a point to where you realize that you get to build your own structure and that it is on you, but it is still very important to have it. Once you have that in place, then yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. Discipline kicks in, and you can move much faster than your peers.
Yeah, true. So with 12 letter of intent sent out and 2 successful acquisitions, so what would you say are the key elements of creating a strong LOI when making an offer?
Yeah, the first thing to understand, especially if you've never sent out an LOI, is that an LOI is non-binding. And the easiest way to say that is like it's not. It's like giving an engagement ring. Like there's no commitment for you to marry. There's no breakup fee. Um,
I
and
like
in
this.
fact, if
Yeah.
things,
Example.
yeah, if it doesn't work out, you should walk away. Like this is a non-binding thing. So I'm not telling you to send out LOIs frivolously, but I am telling you that they don't matter. Like stop putting so much weight on the LOI.
So is it the same that if you break her engagement, you're more likely never going to see her again? So it's the same with the seller. If you don't follow up with the LOI, then obviously you end up spoiling your relationship with the seller.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it really comes down to you professionally. Like if you're
Okay.
engaging with the seller in good faith and deals, a lot of times they just don't work out. Most of the deals that go under LOI don't work out. And so as long as you're carrying yourself professionally, as long as you're open and honest and communicating clearly with the seller, then, if the deal doesn't work, there's a way to end that amicably. And you never know. Like I've had deals where I've had to end an LOI and broken it off with a seller only to have that seller come back, several months or even a year later and say, hey, I, maybe is there still a deal here? Maybe they worked with a couple other potential buyers that didn't work out and they circle back because of the way that we went through that transaction,
Yeah.
and, you never know, things can change over time. So it's not quite as bad as breaking it off romantically. But it does come back to like how you acquit yourself as a buyer. And that, like I said before, if you're professional, if you're clear, how you deal with your brokers, how you deal with sellers, how you deal with everyone really does, you know, send your reputation forward in the market.
Okay. So people interested in buying a business but unsure of where to start. So what's your go-to advice for getting into the world of acquisitions?
Yeah. Before I touch on that, I just realized that you asked something very specific, and I did not give you a specific answer on the LOI. What makes an LOI really good is that it's just an outline of a potential deal. You're saying, I'm interested in your business at this type of valuation. Be kind of clear, like if you're going to buy between 3 and 5x of earnings, say that. If you have an idea of what it's going to be, say that. Clearly state that you're going to want some sort of seller finance in the deal if that's important for you, or there's an earnout in there, or how you're going to calculate working capital. These are things that if you're clear about in the beginning, you don't have to narrow down and iron out all the details. But if you're clear about your expectations, then it's not going to be a surprise, or at least less of a surprise for the seller when you have to get into that during due diligence. So the more clear you can be on your LOI, the better you're going to be, and the easier negotiations are going to be.
Right.
So just want to make sure I answer your question before moving on.
Yeah.
As far as how to get started, I get questions, I get messages every single day, mostly through LinkedIn, from people who are like, hey, I've heard a lot about buying a business and I'm interested. How can I get started? And the answer is pretty clear. You start, with the fundamentals. And the way that looks is, first and foremost, it's the HBR, Harvard Business Review Guide to Buying a Small Business. Don't, read that. It's not long. It's not stuffy. I know it sounds stuffy because it's the HBR guide, but it's remarkably clear. And it's exactly what a searcher who expects to use the SBA 7A program to acquire business should read. It talks about, if you're going to buy on your own and you're going to leverage the SBA program, these are the types of businesses you should be looking for. These are the types of things you should be thinking about during due diligence. These are the types of things you should avoid. And it kind of paints out a picture of what a perfect deal looks like. And so be clear that there is no perfect deal and you're not going to find that. But
Right.
in an ideal world, like it sets the boundary for what you should be looking for.
Okay.
Beyond that, highly recommend reading Buy Then Build by Walker Deibel, where he talks about his journey doing a self-funded ETA search. And I just wrapped up Cody Sanchez's Main Street Millionaire book that she just released this past week. I thought that was pretty good too. So I highly recommend those. I think if you're serious about buying a business and you don't take the time to read and kind of educate yourself on the process, then I think you're being a little delusional. I think you need to start there. Once you've done that, then the next step is just understanding like how to build your buy box, how to start engaging with sellers. And I've seen this happen a lot of different ways. Like some people, they tend to get stuck in like the learning trap without actually doing something. I tell people, look, if you've done those steps, if you've read a little bit and you have an idea of where you want to search and you have an idea of the type of business you're looking for, then start talking to brokers. Like get out there and like start, engaging with sellers. And you're not going to close. You're not going to find your business soon. But what it is going to do is going to give you an idea of, what is the market? Like how do I engage with these people? And it's going to help shorten that learning curve between how do I build relationships with brokers? How do I try to find businesses that are off market? What is a conversation with a seller like? Like if you've never done that before, even if you're not ready to buy, like I would highly recommend reaching out to brokers, reaching out to sellers, and then just start having those conversations.
Right.
Yeah.
So the two acquisitions you did, so how did you structure and fund it? So they're all self-funded. You got seller financing. So how was your structure of those two deals?
Yeah. Good question. I originally had planned to use the 7A SBA loan. Turned out that I didn't need to do that. The first acquisition was with a seller that I built a pretty good relationship with. And over the course of 8 or 9 months, we worked out a deal where, we essentially did seller financing with a large cash injection and then like an earnout style. And so basically I was able to join the business after just that. And to be clear, I still personally guaranteed the seller's note. And so, as far from a legal perspective, it was quite similar to using an SBA loan. But I wanted to make sure that I was able to do that deal and make sure it worked. And that was only because I was able to build the relationship with the seller ahead of time, which was about a year in the making. In fact, I'd been talking to this individual seller, while I was still searching for other deals. And so it was kind of a unique structure. And then the second deal was similar, but one thing that you realize after you actually acquire a business, that reputation I talked about how you carry yourself and your impact in the market, it spreads quickly. Because, when you're just looking for your first business to buy, you're just like everybody else. You're a potential buyer. But once you close a deal, now you're a proven buyer. And now all the sellers look at you like, oh, you can close. Oh, you are buying. And what happened to me was like, immediately my inbox just filled up with local competitors to the business that I had bought and said, hey, I would like to leave. Hey, I'm looking for an exit, or, whatever the case may be. And so it really does kind of validate you in the market as far as, your potential going forward.
Okay, what are those two businesses you bought? They are in the same industry?
Yeah, they were landscaping companies in Southern California.
In same city?
Yeah.
They were both competitors?
Same city. Yep.
Okay.
In fact, they're in the same industry. I wouldn't say that they're competitors because their primary markets were different, but they were still in the same space. In fact, the businesses were less than 10 miles away from each other.
Okay, so is that the industry now you're looking into buying businesses in the same industry, or you're open for the other industries as well?
Yeah, so at this point, things have evolved, and now I'm looking at defense industries. So mostly defense and government contractors. And that is very different than landscaping, but there's a reason for that, because for me, landscaping was the weird one. My background is in defense and tech, not in landscaping. The only reason I moved forward with the landscaping deal was because, like I said, I built that relationship with the seller. I saw an opportunity, and things kind of fell into place for me on that one. But where I believe my unique skill set is more in defense contracting or government contracting overall. And so now I'm looking at businesses within the defense space, within government contracting. If you're getting at least 40% of your revenues through B2G sales, then that's what I'm looking at.
Great. And so what's one misconception people have about buying a business that you would like to clear up today?
There are so many. The biggest one is that it is just one. It is not passive income. You are deluding yourself. I see a lot of comments and a lot of posts about treating small business ownership like it's a real estate portfolio, which again is not passive in of itself. But the idea that you can own multiple businesses and you don't have to be involved because you're going to hire an operator and you just sit back and collect a check. It is ridiculous. It is one of the most ludicrous things.
So theory of some of the motivational speaker who tells you buy a business, you hire a manager, and move on to next one, and this way you can create a wealth. So that's not true. It's a myth, right?
That's not true. That is total bullshit. It is true in the sense that if you are a large private equity firm, that is what they do. But the big difference is that they have hundreds of millions of dollars and professional operators, and they can afford to hire management teams.
Yeah.
If you're buying in the SBA space, 5 million enterprise value or under, let's be clear, you do not have that kind of money. Your business does not make that kind of money, and you will not have the ability from the profits of the business to hire an operator who can do that. And the biggest reason is because when you buy in this space, you're going to sign a personal guarantee on that SBA debt, which means your operator is not responsible if this business goes under, and your employees aren't responsible, you are. And so the level of risk you're taking to take out $5 million of debt and then think that you're not going to be responsible or involved in the day-to-day operations of that business, it's not just ridiculous, it's irresponsible.
Okay. Right. So, Jed, finally, where can our listeners follow your journey and get in touch with you if somebody wants to exit their business?
Yeah, biggest place is on LinkedIn. I post most of my stuff on LinkedIn. Beyond that, I've just recently started a newsletter as well as posting chats like this to YouTube. And so one of the things I'm a big fan of is just live streams like this, where it's not curated, it's not fancy, it's not polished. We're just going to sit down and we're going to talk about, the nitty gritty of buying and operating small businesses and then posting that on YouTube. So
sharing the real knowledge, I would say.
Yeah, as much as possible. So finding me on LinkedIn is probably step number one.
Thank you. Thanks for listening our conversation today. I'm signing off till next time and see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Tahir. Appreciate it.